Alright, so today we're going to cover the volume of a cone. Just like yesterday when we were talking about in a pyramid that it was only 1/3 of the prism that had the same base, it's the same thing with the cone here. So the cone would be 1/3 of the volume of this cylinder. So we can either use 1/3 base area times height, or since we know the base is going to be a circle, I can use pi r squared in place of that base area because I know the base is always going to be a circle. So for example 1, we're going to use the formula 1/3 pi r squared h. And in this problem, we know that the radius is 3. So I'll go ahead and plug the 3 in for the radius, and the height is 8. So I'll plug 8 in for the height. So then when I square 3, I get 9. And then 1/3 times 9 gives me 3 pi. But I have to take times 8. And so that's where I get 24 pi centimeters cubed. For example number 2, I'm still going to use the 1/3 pi r squared h. It's just this time they told us that the diameter was 12. So if I know that the diameter is 12, then that means the radius would have to be 6. So when I plug into my formula, I'll use 6 for the radius and 4 for our height. So then I take and square the 6 to get 36. And then 1/3 times 36 is 12 pi. And I have to take that times 4. So I get 48 pi. And my label would be centimeters cubed. And then for our last example, for example 3, they told us our radius is 5. And this time they told us that the slant height here is the 13. So because the slant height is 13, in order to find the height, I could use Pythagorean theorem. 5 squared plus h squared equals 13 squared. Or you could recognize this as a Pythagorean triple and know that h is 12. So then if I plug this into our formula, in place of r, I'll put 5, and in place of the height, I'll put 12. So I take 1/3 times pi times 5 squared is 25 times 12. So when I take 1/3 times 25 times 12, I get 100 pi, and my label would be centimeters cubed. Alright, so for example 4, I know that the radius is 8, and the slant height is 17, so we're going to have to find out what the height is. So I can use the Pythagorean theorem, 8 squared plus h squared equals 17 squared, and solve for h. So 8 squared is 64, 17 squared is 289. So now I can subtract 64 from both sides. And I get h squared equals 225. Then I take the square root, and I get h to be 15. So then I plug that into my volume formula of 1/3 pi r squared h. So I know my radius is 8, and my height we just found to be 15. So when I take and square 8, that gives me 64. And then I have to take 1/3 times 64 times 15. and I get 320 pi centimeters cubed. So then for number 5, looking at this, I have a large cone and then I have a smaller cone that they cut out of the inside of it. So because they cut that out of the inside, I'm going to have to find 2 volumes. So I'm going to start by finding the volume of the big cone first. So I'll have 1/3 times pi times, now the radius of the big cone would be this whole distance. So I would have to take that 5 plus the 1 to get 6. And then the height of the large cone is 16. So when I take and square the 6, I get 36. So now I take 1/3 times 36 times 16, and I get 192 pi centimeters cubed. Then I find the volume of the small cone. So I'll take 1/3 pi. This time the radius of the small cone is just the 5, and then the height of the small cone is 9. So I have 1/3 pi times 25 times 9. So when I take 1/3 times 25 times 9, I get 75 pi. And so then to find out what the volume is of the shape, I would take the big cone's volume, so the 192 pi, and subtract the small cone's volume since they cut that out of the big cone, and get 117 pi centimeters cubed. Then for our last cone here, I'm noticing that this whole angle here is 120 degrees. So when I put the height in here for this cone, which makes it a right angle up here to the radius, that would split this angle in half, so this becomes a 60-degree angle. And if that's 90, then that leaves this as a 30-degree angle over here. So I have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So I can use my ratios of x, x root 3, and 2x. And since the side across from the 60 is the 3, to find out what x is, I'm going to have to take 3 and divide it by the square root of 3. But since I can't divide by a square root, I'm going to rationalize. So I'll multiply both the numerator and the denominator by the square root of 3. So I get 3 square root of 3 over the square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. So then my 3's cancel, and I'm just left with the square root of 3. So that would be the height of that cone. So then to find the volume for this cone, I have 1/3 pi. This time my radius is 3, and the height is the square root of 3. So when I square 3, I get 1/3 pi times 9 times the square root of 3. So that gives me 3 pi centimeters cubed. And that's it.